So, I, 24, female, recently got a job at my aunt's, dad's older sister's company. It's a decent position given that this is just my second job and I get paid a reasonable amount. I can afford rent and a nice lifestyle with my income. But for some reason, my mother believes that I'm suddenly a billionaire now, and she can ask me for financial help whenever she wants, and for whatever she wants. For the past couple of weeks, every time she wants to buy something, she asks me if I can pay for it. And I usually say yes because it's small, insignificant things that won't really make much of a difference if I pay for it. But it is kind of annoying because she's been treating me like an ATM and I don't really appreciate that. I've been paying for things only because she is my mother. And, we have to appreciate our parents and everything that they've done for us, but that's about it. A couple of days ago, my mother called me and asked me if I could send her about $2,000 because she was falling short on rent and she needed help. Now, $2,000 is a huge amount, and I instantly said no. The reason behind that was that I knew that she was also a working woman and could afford to pay her own rent. Granted, she was just a music teacher, but she also received monthly alimony payments from her ex-husband. My dad and her had never married, but he'd also been sending her child support payments throughout my childhood, and my father came from a pretty rich family. But my mother and I would live very frugally at her house when it was her turn to have me when I was a kid. So I knew that she was saving money and had saved up a lot from the past. So there was just no way that she was falling short on rent, and if she was, it was probably because of her own extravagant lifestyle choices. She was not much of a saver anymore, not after I grew up and moved out. And she would spend all her money because you only live once, or whatever. That's a great school of thought if you want to end up broke by the end of the month, which is what happened. I've tried to explain this to my mother countless times, but she never listens to me, so I just gave up. Anyhow, I was not going to help her out with the rent. She could do it herself if she wanted to. When I said that I wasn't going to send her the money on the phone call, she started getting really agitated and accused me of being a selfish daughter. I was cool with it because I knew I wasn't being selfish. I was just being wise with my own money. I didn't want to help her once and then again and again for the rest of her life because the one thing that I know about my mother is that she always makes a habit of stupid things like this. We got into an argument about it and I hung up when she told me that she would complain to my father about this and make sure that I coughed up the money. I told her that my father wasn't going to make me do anything that I didn't want to because he knew that I was an adult and I could choose whatever I wanted to do with my own hard-earned money. We didn't talk to each other for a few days, but then she called me up and apologized to me for being weird about the money thing. I thought she was going to ask me for money again, but she didn't and told me that she just wanted to make things right with her daughter. I forgave her because I didn't want to hold a grudge against her and ruin our already strained relationship. So we had a civil discussion about it. She said sorry and we were over it. This week, I was celebrating my birthday and I invited a couple of my relatives, including my aunt, obviously, and my parents, for a family dinner at my new apartment. I invited my mother even though I was still kind of iffy about her, but I wanted to make amends with her. So I invited her to be nice. She did attend the party, but as soon as she showed up at my house, she made a comment about how huge and pretty my new apartment was. But I knew by the tone of her voice that she was being snarky, and I could tell that inviting her had been a mistake, because she was clearly still not over our last fight. Throughout the evening, she kept talking about how rich I was now and tried to make a big deal of my new job and my fancy new apartment, and even insinuated that soon enough I would be too good to be seen with my guests at the party anymore. It started out funny and everybody thought that she was just bragging about her daughter, but eventually it just got awkward and weird because she wouldn't stop talking about it. I knew what this was all about, and I so badly wanted to confront her, but I didn't want to ruin my own birthday dinner, so I kept my mouth shut throughout and made a mental note to deal with this later. But then my mother decided that she was going to give a speech, apparently making everybody awkward and uncomfortable with her weird, sarcastic jokes about my new everything wasn't enough. She stood up and started talking about how hard she had worked to raise me, and now that I was my own person, she felt like she was being forgotten. She told everybody about the incident that had taken place a couple of days ago, where she had asked me if she could borrow some money to make rent on time, and I had said no without missing a beat. She talked about how heartless and cruel it was for kids to just discard their parents after they were grown-ups, and mentioned that she truly believed that these were awful times that we were living in, where children didn't even seem to care for their parents anymore. Most of the people didn't seem very touched, but just seemed put off by her unnecessarily emotional and dramatic speech. I guess it was because most people present at the party were well aware of my mother's spendthrift tendencies and weren't going to sympathize with her. Once she was done with her little speech, I decided that I was done with her. I got up on my feet as well and started slow clapping just to drive home how ridiculous she was being. There was pin drop silence in the apartment, and I could actually hear my clap sounding 10 times as loud, so I can only imagine how embarrassing it was for my mother. She started looking really red in the face as well when I stopped the clapping. I told her that I had enough of her theatrics, and I wanted her to leave the party immediately so that the rest of us could get on with the evening and have fun. I wasn't going to let her little performance ruin my birthday. She told me that she was my mother and I couldn't speak to her that way. She looked affronted, but I didn't care. Her speech had really rubbed me the wrong way, and I honestly wasn't thinking about what anybody else would think of me. I just wanted my mother out of there. She refused to leave and told me that I was part of her family, so she had every right to be there. That ended in a huge argument which went down in front of all the guests at the dinner, and honestly, I'm kind of embarrassed by how I behaved. By the end of the argument, I was screaming and I didn't even realize it, but there were tears on my face because I had been sobbing so hard. My dad actually had to drag me away from my mother. That's how bad the fight had gotten. He took me to my room and tried to comfort me because I was struggling to even breathe. Outside, I could hear a lot of commotion, and after about half an hour, when my dad and I finally came out of the room, I noticed that my mother was gone. I apologized to all my guests for behaving the way that I did, but none of them held it against me. Most of my family told me that they really were proud of me and whatever I had achieved so far, and that my mother was just a horrible person. They said a lot of kind things to me to make me feel better, and that really worked for me. We had a quiet dinner and then they left. It's been a few days since that happened, and I had made up my mind that I was never going to speak to my mother again. Because what she had done at the party was really something else. She had made my birthday dinner all about herself and tried to turn my family against me. But yesterday, I received a message from her saying that she was sorry about what she did. But she had actually been struggling with money. She told me that she'd been supporting one of her neighbor's kids who had leukemia, and that's why she was running short on cash. She didn't want to bring it up at the party because she didn't want to make it seem like she was showing off her good deeds. She told me that while helping her neighbor out, she'd forgotten to keep track of her own expenses, which is why she'd been relying on me. She told me that she was going to return the money as soon as she could, and she had no intention of keeping it with her. She also said that she had asked me and nobody else for help because she felt that I, being her daughter, would always look out for her and she could count on me. She ended the message by apologizing to me for her behavior once again, and also added that she truly was proud of me. She had just wanted a teeny tiny bit of help because she was trying to do something good for once in her life, but unfortunately, she had messed that up as well. I'm not going to lie. Reading that message broke my heart because even though my relationship with my mother was strained and difficult at best, it wasn't like I never wanted her involved in my life. And it definitely wasn't as if I'd hated her forever. We had been pretty close when I was a kid, but then with time we'd just grown apart. And then she remarried when I was a teenager. She put her husband above me, which is probably what contributed to the growing distance between us. I would love to go back to having the same kind of relationship that I did with her when I was a child, but I don't know how we can go back to that when we've come so far from it. And honestly, I feel like if she was helping some sick kid with his medical bills, then she really should have mentioned that to me, and I wouldn't have hesitated to give her the money that she needed. I feel like that was an important piece of information that I should have known. Right now, I feel like a horrible human being, and I don't know if I should apologize to my mother or not, which is why I'm here. AITA for refusing to help my mother with rent and then kicking her out of the family dinner at my apartment? Update 1. Hi everybody. I read the comments on my post and I've got to say you guys really saved me from apologizing to my mother, because honestly I was actually going to do that because she had really gaslit me into thinking that I was somehow at fault here. Oh, and also the whole story about helping some kid with leukemia? Yeah, all fake. That never happened. She was just bluffing to guilt trip me, and I can't believe that I almost fell for it. After thinking for a while about what I should do, I suddenly remembered that my mother only had 2 neighbors who lived in the adjacent houses on her street. One of them was an old couple with no kids, and the other was a single mother. But as far as I could remember, her son was perfectly healthy the last time that I saw him, which was just a couple of months ago when my mother invited me for lunch. So I decided to make a phone call and ask my mother's neighbor how her son was doing. When I called her to ask about her son's health, she told me that he was doing perfectly fine and was actually kind of put off by my sudden phone call. It wasn't like we were close friends, and I only even had her number because my mother had forced me to save it in case something were to happen to her, and she couldn't reach the phone or something equally weird. I can't remember why. I even asked her twice if her son was actually doing okay, and I'm pretty sure that she was very creeped out by my sudden and unexplained interest in her son's health. But I didn't care. I just had to get to the bottom of this. So she told me that her son was perfectly fine yet again and told me that there was absolutely nothing wrong with him, so I didn't have to worry about him. And after that confirmation, she ended the conversation and hung up the phone as fast as she could, which I don't blame her for. This happened about 2 days ago, and whatever guilt I was feeling for humiliating my mother in front of all my guests disappeared as soon as I learned that she'd been bluffing all along just to get an apology out of me so she could keep using me as her personal ATM. She had texted me since the last message that she sent, but I still blocked her nevertheless because whatever she had to say after this, I wasn't willing to hear. I just wasn't interested because I knew it would be the same old gaslighting and manipulation to get me back on good terms with her, and that's the last thing that I wanted or needed. I'm finally doing well in life right now, and I don't think I want to be talking to my mother anymore. She is toxic and manipulative and a huge narcissist. I'm honestly done with her. Update 2. I said that I was done with her just a week ago, but I guess she's not done with me. She has been going around texting all the family members who were there at the party to talk to me and convince me somehow to unblock her. I have received several screenshots of her texting our relatives, trying to convince them that she was just having a bad mental health day back then, and she wanted to fix her relationship with me. So far, it hasn't worked with anyone because everyone has been able to call her bluff. She used to do this in the past as well, where she would just blame everything on a bad mental health day and excuse her behavior, even though at the time it seemed like she was fully in her senses. My father has told me not to pay heed to anything that she's doing because it's only going to make me mad if I pay attention to it. I can't change her because she's not willing to change, but honestly, it's easier said than done. Deep down, I still want to just scream at her or call her some names and get the closure that I need. But I know that's not healthy, so I'm not doing it. My maternal grandparents have also been trying to get in touch with me through email, but I've just been marking them as spam because I'm not even interested in reading what they have to say. I'd never been close to them because, just like my mother, they were also really weird. Honestly, not even my own mother was closest to her parents, so we wouldn't see them very often. The last time I saw them was probably several months ago when I was visiting my mother and they happened to video call her. I don't even remember when I saw them in person the last time. I haven't been reading their emails because I know that they're just going to try and make me talk to my mother. I don't even know why they're bothering to try because it's not like I'm close to them. So there is literally no chance of me listening to them when I've already blocked my mom. Until now, they've been sending me one email each day, and every day I do the same thing. I don't even read it and just mark it as spam so it doesn't bother me when I see an unopened email in my inbox. I haven't been deleting them though, because it might be something important that I would want to save. Update 3. So something crazy happened today. So I was on my way back home from work when I saw my mother's car following me home. I knew that she had been waiting at my workplace instantly, and I completely lost my cool when I saw that she was tailing me. I pulled over near my street, got out of my car, and headed straight towards her car, which was just behind me. I rapped on the driver's seat window with my knuckles about 3 times before she finally looked up. She seemed embarrassed that she'd been caught, but she still got out of the car and pretended as if this was perfectly normal. She asked me casually if I had given any thought to making things right between us. I snapped at her and told her that I hadn't, and following me around in her car wasn't going to force me to rethink my decision. I told her that I knew that she had been lying about helping some sick kid, and that's why she was borrowing from me. She looked a little taken aback and told me that she wasn't lying and that she was actually helping people. But I knew she was bluffing, so I asked her if she actually was helping people, then why did her neighbor deny it when I called her up? Surely her neighbor had no reason to deny something like this, especially when it was her own daughter who was calling to confirm. My mother started to look a little red in the face when I brought that up and told me that I had no business calling up her neighbors and embarrassing her like this, which was rich coming from her because she had no business demanding money from me almost every other day and then throwing a scene at my dinner party and then lying to me about why she'd been behaving this way all along. My mother told me that her neighbor hadn't been speaking to her for days now, and she finally understood why. It was all because of my phone call, which must have weirded her out. She told me that I owed her an apology, and I laughed in her face because I was going to do no such thing, especially not after everything that she had done. So she started throwing a temper tantrum right there in the middle of the street, shouting at me about how I was being ungrateful and selfish. She reminded me yet again that she was the one who had brought me up and raised me on her own, and life was hard as a single mother, so I needed to be thankful. This wasn't even true, because my parents had partial custody of me. So it was actually both her and my father who had brought me up. I also reminded her that she used to get a ton of child support from my father when I was little, so she had no right to claim that she did it all by herself, because that was really just not true. She looked scandalized when I said that and told me that her receiving child support was not something that was for me to care about or to hold against her. I just rolled my eyes and began to walk back to my car. She tried to stop me by calling my name several times, but I didn't even look back until she said that she was going to crash into my car if I didn't speak to her. I looked behind and asked her if she was crazy, and that if she tried to do anything of the sort, then I would call the cops on her. She told me that I absolutely needed to hear her out, so I crossed my arms and just stood near my car, refusing to move. She came to me and told me that she had been lying all along, and the reason that she needed the money was that she'd been scammed out of a lot of cash by her ex-boyfriend, who had run away with it, and now she couldn't find him anymore. Apparently, she wanted to tell me about it, but she was too ashamed and embarrassed to disclose this information because her boyfriend was closer to me in age than to her. It was ridiculous, but I believed her because she was just the kind of person who would get into a situation like this and then try to hide it from everyone. Unfortunately, it meant nothing to me, so I told her that it was sad, but I still wasn't going to help her. It was her own fault for ruining her relationship with me, instead of just being honest from the get-go. But instead, she purposely chose to stir up so much trouble and drama for me. I was very direct with her and told her to her face that I wasn't interested in her struggles because she had never been interested in mine. After I moved out, she would only call me or text me when she needed to talk to me, but never once asked me how I was doing. I used to think that it was okay because my mother needed me more than I needed her, but I knew now that it wasn't true and that she was just plain selfish and didn't care for anyone more than she cared for herself. That was it. There was no deeper meaning. After saying that, I got into my car and drove away before she had a chance to reply. I could see her in my rearview mirror, standing with a horrified look on her face, and I have to admit, it brought me a sense of great satisfaction to see her like that. I felt like I had received the closure that I needed. Update 4. Okay, so guys, I finally opened the emails that my mother's parents had been sending me, and all of them insisted on one thing. And that was that my mother needed the money because apparently she wasn't helping some sick kid, but she was actually helping them out with their medical expenses. Yet another lie, of course. I figured that they had also been in on the fact that my mother was taking money from me and wanted to help her out in her attempts to reconcile with me. So they could have also had access to my money. Too bad that my mother couldn't stick to one story, because then I might have even believed her. It's been about a week since I last saw her, and she hasn't tried to get in touch with me since, which I'm grateful for because I don't want to speak to her. I told my dad about everything and he said that I made the right call. I didn't need to feel guilty about any of this because my mother had pretty much dug her own grave with her weird behavior, her entitlement, and of course, all the lying. Stay tuned for more stories from our girl relationships.